here's another symbol that you're all familiar with. That's Tao. And Tao means two things. It either means the way, depending on the translation, the way, which is that, or it means meaning. So to live in Tao is to live in meaning. And this symbol is a symbol of the totality of the world. And why is that? Well, it's because this is chaos. And that's usually given a feminine connotation for reasons that we'll discuss later. And this is order. And it's chaos, and it's the split between chaos and order and the mutual coexistence that makes the world. And this dot is black because anything orderly can immediately be turned into chaos, more or less unpredictably, and sometimes by your own efforts. And chaos can also be turned into order. That's why this little dot's white, also by your own efforts. Exploration does that. And Tao, the man who lives in Tao, lives on this line, with 1 foot in order and 1 foot in chaos. And the reason for that, see, that's where all the interesting things are happening. That's where the information is flowing. If you're all here, you predict everything. Well, that's secure, but it's boring. And it's not just boring symbolically. It defines boring. There's no new information happening here. And if you're here, well, you're so overwhelmed with new information that you can't do anything with it. And you want to be here. And if you're here, then you're doing this. You're paying attention to anomalous information, always. You're allowing that to destabilize this structure when it's necessary. But you have to do this. That's the hero in the belly of the beast, by the way, or the sun that hacks its way out of the dragon at night and back up. So that's the path of the hero. And in terms of systems that are stable over time, an authoritarian system says, this is not necessary. So it decays as things change. A system that's properly balanced said, well, we need this, but we also need this. And therefore, we're going to have to allow a certain amount of disorder into the system so that flexibility can be maintained. So, and the trick is balance. It's like too much novelty, everything degenerates. Too much order, everything petrifies. You want to be right on the proper edge, and the way that you can tell you're on the edge when you're interested in something. That's the sign that says, you say, well, there's an affective signpost that tells you when you're here. If you're here, you're interested. If you're here, you're terrified. If you're here, you're bored. You want to be right in the middle of that. And then, well, that means your brain is on in its optimal, in an optimal manner. Because your sensory systems are properly heightened, because you're a little bit anxious. You're doing a lot of exploration. We find that pleasurable. Like, that's left frontal activation. People like that. That's incentive, reward, pleasure. It says, when you're here, you're on. It's analgesic too, which is kind of interesting.
Is that like flow?
Yeah, it's not quite though, because the problem with things like flow, and this is Joseph Campbell's thing too, is they're always talking about following your happiness. This is not right. To get here, what you have to do is look at things that you hate. Well, the problem is no one will buy a book that tells them that. It's flow. No, but this is a major problem. Problem with New Age philosophy in general. It's the anomaly that you have to face. And the a priori motivational significance of an anomaly is terror. Because otherwise people would be in flow all the time, and they're not.
You could think about the classical human habitation as two places. One where your predator detection system isn't on alert, and another where your predator detection system is on alert. And you could think about that roughly as the distinction between explored territory and unexplored territory. And really the founding of a place is precisely, this is a lot of this I got from reading Mircea Eliade, the founding of a place is precisely the definition of an explored center set against the unexplored periphery. And you know, what's interesting about that, so you can kind of think about that with regards to the walled city, right? Everything in the wall is cosmos, and everything outside the wall is chaos. And, you know, but it also extends to the conceptual realm, because imagine that you're the master of a field of study, And so that's an interesting metaphor, because a field is a geographical metaphor, right? And if in the center of the field are those things that everyone knows really well, the axioms that everyone abides by in the field. And then as you move towards the fringes, you get towards the unknown, towards the frontier of the discipline. And as you become expert, you move from the center to the frontier. And so then you're on the border when you're a scholar, a competent scholar, you're on the border between the unexplored, or the explored and the unexplored. And you're trying to further that border. So even if you're just doing this abstractly, it's the same thing. And it's a reflection of the fact that every human environment, concrete or abstract, it makes no difference, recapitulates the cosmos-chaos dichotomy, or the order-chaos dichotomy. And that's why in Taoism, for example, it's the union of chaos and order that constitutes being itself, and that you stand on the border between chaos and order, because that's the proper place to be. Too orderly, too much in the explored, you're not learning anything. Too much out there where the predators lurk, then you're frozen with terror. And neither of those positions are desirable. So, and that's what, and so you think, and this is a concrete reality, obviously, as well as a psychological reality. There were reasons for those walls, right? Because inside the walls were all the people like us. And so that begs the question, what does it mean for people to be like us? And then outside the wall, there was all those people, because they were the worst forms of predators, because people are actually the worst forms of predators, who aren't like us. And the wall is there to draw a distinction between like us and not like us. And so, and that was a matter of life and death. You can tell that because, look at those walls. They had to build those by hand. And you do see walled cities that have 3 rings of walls. So these people were terrified, but not so terrified as the people who built 3 walls. They were really terrified. And they had their reasons. So, okay, so now there's an idea that's reflected in the Jacob's Ladder story, that the center where you put the pillar is also the place where heaven and earth touch. And so that's a complicated idea. I think that you can, I'm trying to look at these stories from a psychological perspective. And so then you could say that that's a symbolic place where the lowest and the highest come together. And so it's a place where earthly being stretches up to the highest possible ethical abstraction. And that's the center, because one of the things that defines us, say, as opposed to them, is that we're all united within a certain ethic. That's what makes us the same. This is a complicated line of reasoning, but I'll go back to it after I show you some more pictures. But so that's the first idea, is that the center is the place where the lowest and the highest touch simultaneously. And so you could say that in some sense it specifies the aim of a group of people. That's another way. If you get together with people to make a group, even at work, you group yourself around a project, and that unites you. And it unites you because you all have the same aim. You're all pointing to the same thing. And that makes you the same in some ways, because if you're after the same thing I am, then the same things are going to be important to you that are important to me. And the same things are going to be negative to you that are negative to me, because our emotions work out that way. And that means I can instantly predict you. I know how you're going to behave. And so our aim, which is basically our ethical aim, it's because we're aiming at something better at least in principle. We're aiming at something better. It's our ethical aim that unites our perceptions, and that's what aligns our emotions. And so that sort of begs the question, if you're going to build a community, around what aim should the community congregate? Okay, so the idea here is that the center of the community is the pillar that unites heaven and earth. So it unites the lowest with the highest. So there's some intimation of the idea that it's the highest that unites the community. Okay, and so keep that in mind. And that's a very old idea as well. That's the idea of the axis mundi, which is the center pole that unites heaven and earth. It's an unbelievably old... idea, tens of thousands of years old. It might even stretch back to whatever our archaic memories, quasi-memories, I don't know what you would describe them, archetypal memories of our excessively old ancestry in trees, when the tree itself was in fact the center of the world, and that it was ringed by snakes and chaos. And so, well, we have no idea how old these ideas are, but they're very, very old. And evolution is a conservative business. Once it builds a gadget, then it builds new things on top of that gadget. It's like a medieval town, right? The center of the town is really old, and newer areas of the town get built around it, but the center is still really old. And that's what we're like, you know. Our platforms, like our basic physiological structure, this skeletal body, is some tens of millions of years older, or older than that. If you think about vertebrates, it's much older than that, and that's all conserved. So everything's built on top of everything else. All right, so there's a kind of a classic town, and there's the idea I showed you. This is Scandinavian world tree, same idea. It unites heaven and earth, and around the roots of that tree are snakes that eat this tree constantly. So that's the idea, that there's stability, but there's constant transformation around that stability. And at the same time the snakes are gnawing on the roots, there's streams that are nourishing it. So it's sort of an echo of the idea that life depends on death and renewal constantly, because your cells are dying and being renewed constantly, right? If they are just proliferating, then you have cancer. If they're just dying, then you die. You have to get the balance between death and life exactly right so that you can actually live, which is also a very strange thing. So, and that tree is something that reaches from the bottom layers of being, maybe the microcosm, all the way to the macrocosm. That's the idea anyways. So then there's Jacob and his pillar. He's got this idea that you can mark the center with this stone. Like, it sort of symbolizes what he was laying on when he dreamt, but now he's got this idea. You put something erect and it marks the center, and it symbolizes his vision of the highest good, something like that.